Back to Contact Pod. We've reached the fifth and final episode of our deep dive into Wharton Professor's Forecast 2025. We've been exploring some fascinating predictions about the future of work.
Yeah, it feels like just yesterday we were starting on that first article, and now we're wrapping things up with Wharton Management Professor Peter Capelli.
I know, right? Time flies when you're having fun. So for this final episode, Capelli shared some really insightful observations. Some were surprising, too, about current trends and what they might mean for the coming years. One of the things that really struck me was his idea of the more so future.
Yes. The more so future. Basically, it means we shouldn't expect, dramatic overnight revolutions in the workplace.
Right.
Instead, we should look for existing trends that are gaining momentum.
Okay.
Because those are the ones that are likely to shape the work landscape in 2025 and beyond.
That makes a lot of sense. It makes you think about what's happening right now in your own field. So, for example, if you're in software development, maybe this means focusing even more on cybersecurity skills as those threats become more and more prominent. Or if you're in marketing, maybe it's about doubling down on understanding and leveraging AI for content creation.
Exactly. It's about recognizing those seeds of change that are already present and thinking about how they might grow into something much bigger.
So we should be looking for those things that we're already seeing and think, okay, this is only going to get bigger.
Exactly.
And speaking of trends, Capelli points to the incredibly tight labor market, not technology as the major force shaping the workplace right now.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective.
It is interesting. We always hear about, tech disrupting everything. But Capelli argues that low unemployment rates give employees more leverage than ever before. More choices, the ability to switch jobs easily, and the power to demand better conditions. And compensation, too, of course. It's a complete flip from just a few years ago, when companies seem to hold all the cards.
Yeah, it seems like the balance of power is shifting.
For sure.
So now the challenge for companies is how to adapt to this new reality and attract and retain top talent.
That's really interesting.
Especially since, according to Capelli, the much-hyped remote work revolution might not be as widespread as we think.
Wait, really? He mentioned that only 26% of U.S. employers actually offer remote or hybrid work options. It feels like remote work is everywhere these days. I mean, is that just the media overblowing it?
Capelli actually attributes this disconnect to the influence of the HR industry.
Okay.
Now, for those unfamiliar, this refers to the vast network of companies that provide services like recruiting, training, benefits, administration, and more.
Got it.
It's a massive industry worth almost $2 trillion in the U.S. alone.
Wow.
And like any industry, they need to market their services, often emphasizing change and disruption to stay relevant.
So you're saying that the narrative around remote work has been amplified, maybe even exaggerated by the people who stand to benefit from it.
Potentially. Right.
Wow. That's a fascinating point. It makes you wonder how much of what we perceive as the future of work is being shaped by market forces rather than genuine trends. But what about the companies that did go all in on remote work? Are they sticking with it?
Not necessarily. Capelli points out that many companies are calling workers back to the office, at least partially.
Yeah.
While remote work functioned better than expected initially, the downsides become more apparent over time.
I can see that. You lose those casual interactions, the spontaneous brainstorming sessions, and it makes sense that onboarding new employees remotely is a challenge.
Yeah.
How do you transmit company culture and build those all-important connections when everyone's scattered?
Exactly. It's not impossible, but it requires a lot more effort and intentionality, too.
Sure.
Plus, let's not forget the challenge of managing employee expectations.
Yeah.
After years of remote-first policies, shifting back to a hybrid or in-office model can lead to frustration and even resentment.
For sure. It's a tough situation for both sides. Companies are trying to find that sweet spot between flexibility and collaboration, while also navigating a changing labor market and evolving employee expectations. And on top of all that, Capelli brings up another trend that feels especially relevant to anyone just starting out in their career or trying to switch fields: the entry-level experience paradox.
Oh, the classic catch-22. You need experience to get a job, but you need a job to get experience.
Exactly. It seems like even entry-level jobs now demand years of prior experience, which creates a real barrier for new graduates and career changers. What's driving this trend?
Capelli attributes it to the post-recession period. When job seekers were plentiful, companies inflated their requirements. They could afford to be picky.
Right.
And unfortunately, that mindset seems to have persisted even as the labor market has tightened.
So it's like companies got used to having a surplus of qualified candidates, And now they're hesitant to adjust their expectations even though the reality on the ground has shifted dramatically. But that doesn't seem fair to people who are just starting out.
Yeah, it is a tough situation. And speaking of areas where expectations clash with reality, let's talk about artificial intelligence in the workplace. The rise of AI is another one of those hot topics where the hype often outpaces reality.
Oh, absolutely. We've heard so much about AI replacing jobs en masse,
Hmm.
but Capelli seems to be more cautious about those claims.
He is. He argues that the cost of implementing AI to automate tasks often outweighs the benefit, especially for those low-value repetitive tasks that are already fairly standardized.
Okay.
He gives the example of generative AI writing form letters.
Right.
Sure, AI could do that, but no one is writing those from scratch anymore anyway.
That makes sense. So it's not as simple as AI can do it, so humans are out of a job.
Exactly. The bigger picture,
Yeah.
according to Capelli, is that AI is more likely to augment human work rather than completely replace it.
Okay.
Think of it as a tool that can help us work more efficiently and free up our time to focus on those higher level tasks that require creativity, problem solving, and emotional intelligence.
That's a much more optimistic outlook and honestly more realistic. It's not about humans versus robots. It's about finding ways to use AI to enhance our capabilities.
Right.
And that brings us to another interesting point that Capelli raises, the intersection of politics and the future of work. He asks a thought-provoking question. Will political shifts that favor employers end up impacting the very working class who may have voted for those shifts?
Yeah, it's a complex question with far-reaching implications.
Total.
We've talked about this idea of observing trends, but how might political changes influence the workplace in the years to come?
Yeah.
Could we see a rollback of worker protections or a weakening of unions? And if so, how would that impact wages, benefits, and overall job security?
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Hmm.
If we enter a period where policies become more employer-friendly, could it end up hurting the very people who supported those policies? It's something we'll need to keep a close eye on.
Definitely. And speaking of companies making big moves, Capelli also brought up Amazon's recent and rather strict callback to the office. It seems to have caused quite a stir and has other companies rethinking their own remote work policies.
Oh, yeah, the Amazon effect.
Little.
It's been all over the news. Do you think this is a sign of things to come? Are we about to see a mass exodus back to the office?
Capelli seems to think so. He predicts that, especially with the possibility of a softening labor market, more companies will follow Amazon's lead. They're testing the waters, seeing how far they can push for a return to the office before encountering serious resistance from employees.
So it'd be interesting to see how this all plays out. Will employees willingly give up the flexibility they've gotten used to? Or will they push back, demanding more control over where and how they work?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it?
It is.
We're at a crossroads in the evolution of work. The pandemic forced us to experiment with new ways of working, but now we're trying to figure out what the new normal is like.
Right.
And it's happening against the backdrop of shifting political landscapes, economic uncertainty, and rapid technological advancements.
It's a lot to unpack, and Capelli's insights provide a really helpful framework for understanding the forces at play.
I agree. He's given us a lot to think about. And it's a good reminder that the future of work isn't some predetermined outcome. It's something we actively create through our choices, actions, and priorities.
Well said. So how do we navigate this complex and ever-changing world of work? What advice would you give our listeners based on what we've learned from Capelli and the other Wharton professors?
First, I'd say don't get caught up in the hype. Whether it's about remote work, AI, or any other major trend, it's important to separate the signal from the noise. Don't blindly accept headlines or pronouncements.
Okay.
Instead, focus on understanding the underlying dynamics at play and how they might impact your specific situation.
It's about being an informed consumer of information, right? Especially when we're bombarded with so much data and opinions these days.
Yeah.
But how do we sift through all of that and figure out what's truly relevant and important?
That's where critical thinking comes in. Question your assumptions. Look for evidence to support claims. And don't be afraid to seek out diverse perspectives. Talk to people in different fields. Read articles from various sources. And challenge your own preconceived notions.
That's great advice for navigating not just the world of work, but life in general. And it brings us back to Capelli's more so future idea. I'm curious to hear more about the specific trends he sees intensifying in the coming years. He mentioned that the trend of companies focusing on financial metrics over employee well-being is likely to continue.
Yes, the age-old tension between the bottom line and the human line. It's a complex issue with no easy solution.
For sure.
On the one hand, companies need to be profitable to survive. But neglecting the well-being of employees can lead to burnout, turnover, and decreased productivity.
It's a classic case of short-term gains versus long-term sustainability. But as you mentioned earlier, it seems like many companies prioritize those short-term profits, even if it means sacrificing their employees' well-being in the process.
Unfortunately, that's often the case, and it's partly due to how we currently measure company performance. Those metrics don't adequately capture the costs of high turnover or low employee morale.
Right.
So until that changes, it's likely that companies will continue making decisions that prioritize the bottom line, even if it means neglecting employee well-being.
So we're trapped in a bit of a catch-22. The metrics that are supposed to guide companies towards success are often blind to the factors that contribute most to long-term sustainability and growth.
It is a paradox, isn't it? And
Yep.
it speaks to the need for a more holistic approach to measuring company performance, one that takes into account not just financial metrics, but also factors like employee engagement, satisfaction, and overall well-being.
So it's about recognizing that people are a company's most valuable asset, and that investing in their well-being is not only ethically sound, but also makes good business sense in the long run.
Exactly.
Besides this focus on financial metrics, does Capelli highlight any other more so trends?
He did. He touched upon the increasing pressure on employees to be always on,
Ugh.
constantly available and responsive, even outside traditional work hours.
I think we can all relate to that. Especially in our hyper-connected world, the line between work and personal life has become increasingly blurred, and it can be difficult to disconnect and recharge.
You're right. And this constant connectivity takes a toll on our mental health, relationships, and overall well-being. Setting boundaries and protecting time for rest and recovery is essential.
That's easy to say, but not always easy to do,
hmm
especially if you're in a workplace culture that expects you to be available 24/7. There's this unspoken pressure to prove your dedication by always being online.
It's a subtle but powerful form of pressure, and it can be difficult to resist. But prioritizing your well-being and not succumbing to the expectation of constant availability is crucial.
So it's about setting healthy boundaries and finding a balance that works both professionally and personally.
Yeah.
This ties back to that employee leverage we discussed earlier. As the labor market remains tight, employees have more power to demand better working conditions, including reasonable expectations around work-life balance.
That's an excellent point. It's not just about negotiating higher salaries, it's about advocating for a work environment that supports overall well-being and allows you to thrive both inside and outside the workplace.
Absolutely. It's about shifting the conversation from simply earning a living to creating a life that is fulfilling and sustainable.
Well said. And it brings us back to that provocative question Capelli raised about the impact of politics on the future of work. How might political shifts that favor employers affect the very workers who may have voted for those shifts?
It's a question that goes beyond economics and touches upon the very fabric of our society. What kind of future do we want to create for ourselves and for future generations? Do we prioritize profits over people? Or do we strive to create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive and live a dignified life?
It's a choice we all face both individually and collectively, and the decisions we make today will have profound consequences for the years to come.
It's about recognizing that the future of work is not predetermined. It's something we actively create through the choices we make, the policies we support, and the values we prioritize.
Exactly. And as we've seen from our deep dive into Wharton professors' forecasts, there are many possible futures. It's up to us to decide which path we want to take.
That's a powerful message. The future isn't something that simply happens to us. It's something we shape through our actions and choices.
And as we navigate this ever-changing landscape, it's important to remember that we're not alone. We have each other. We have the power of collective action. And we have the ability to create a future of work that is more just, equitable, and fulfilling for all.
Yeah, it really is a fascinating conversation and such an important one to be having right now. And, speaking of crucial conversations, let's go back to that Amazon example. We were discussing it earlier.
Oh, you mean their decision to call everyone back to the office?
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
That's been a major talking point in the business world lately. And it seems like they're really serious about this return to office mandate, even with some employees pushing back.
Yeah, it's definitely a bold move. It's sparked a lot of debate. Capelli seems to think that a lot of other companies will follow suit, especially those that are under pressure, pressure to increase productivity and collaboration. But like we talked about earlier, there's some downsides to forcing people back to the office. I mean, after they've gotten so used to remote work, could this lead to more people quitting or a drop in morale? How do you force people to be innovative and creative just because they're in a certain building?
That's a million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
It's a tough balancing act for sure. Companies have to weigh the potential benefits of in-person work against the
Hmm.
potential costs of alienating their employees.
Hmm.
And we can't forget about the logistics of bringing everyone back, especially for companies that got rid of a lot of their office space during the pandemic.
It's almost like we're trying to go back in time, but the world has changed so much in the past few years.
I know it's true. The pandemic forced companies to adapt so quickly, and now they're trying to find a new balance. But what worked before might not work anymore.
That makes me think back to Capelli's more so future idea. If he's right, the future of work won't be about these sudden radical shifts, but more like an intensification of trends that we're already seeing.
Right.
So what does that mean for someone who's, say, mid-career right now? How can they prepare for this more so future?
That's a great question. I think it really highlights how important adaptability is and continuous learning, too. We can't just rely on the skills and knowledge we have today. We have to constantly be looking ahead, identifying those emerging trends and developing new skills to stay relevant.
So it's not enough to just be good at what you do today.
Hmm?
You need to be able to anticipate what skills will be in demand tomorrow.
You got it. For example, think about data analysis. That's becoming so important in almost every industry now. Even if you're not a data scientist, just having some basic data literacy can make you a much more valuable asset to any team.
That's a good point. It's about being a T-shaped professional. You have
Yeah.
deep expertise in one specific area, but you also have a broader understanding of other relevant fields and trends.
Exactly. And don't forget about those soft skills, things like communication, collaboration, and problem solving. Those are going to be even more valuable in the future, especially as technology automates a lot of those routine tasks.
So while robots might take over some of the boring parts of our jobs, it's those uniquely human skills that will set us apart and keep us employable in the future.
I totally agree. It's about finding that sweet spot where human ingenuity and technology complement each other.
I like that.
And it's about being proactive. Don't wait for your company to tell you what skills you need. Take charge of your own career path. Figure out those emerging trends and invest in your own development.
So it's all about embracing that lifelong learner mindset. I mean, the world is changing so fast, and the only way to stay ahead is to never stop learning.
I couldn't agree more. And it's not just about learning new skills, it's also about adapting your mindset. Be open to new ways of working. Embrace experimentation. And don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone.
It's about challenging the way things have always been done and being willing to question those long-held assumptions about how work should be done. And who knows what the workplace will even look like in 5, 10, or 20 years. We've already seen how much can change in such a short period of time.
You're so right. And that brings us back to that political aspect we discussed earlier. The decisions we make as a society today will have a huge impact on the future of work. If we put policies in place that support worker well-being and promote lifelong learning and create a more level playing field for everyone, then we can create a future of work that benefits everyone, not just a select few.
It's about creating a system that empowers people, that encourages innovation, and that prioritizes human well-being over short-term profits. It might sound idealistic, but I really do think it's achievable if we make the right choices.
I agree with you. It's not just about predicting the future, it's about creating the future we want. And as we wrap up this deep dive into Wharton professors' forecasts, I'm really curious to hear your takeaways. What's resonating with you the most from this conversation?
For me, it's this idea that the future of work isn't some set destination. It's more like a journey. And it's a journey we're all on together. Whether we're employees, employers, policymakers, or educators, we all play a part in shaping this future.
That is a beautiful way to put it. It's a collaborative effort, for sure. And we all have the power to contribute in our own unique ways. And one of the most important things we can do is to stay informed, stay engaged, and never stop asking those critical questions.
Exactly. So to our listeners, I want to encourage you to keep those more so trends in mind. Pay attention to what's happening in your own field, in your community, and in the wider world. Ask those questions, challenge assumptions, and don't be afraid to fight for change.
The future is ours to create. Let's make it a good one.
Wow. It really does feel like something big is about to happen with this whole future of work thing. I mean, we've covered so much in this deep dive. From those shifting power dynamics to that more so future idea. And then AI's role and the whole political landscape.
We really have just tons of insights. And, as we start to wrap up this exploration of Wharton Professor's Forecast 2025, I think we need to remember one thing.
What's that?
This isn't just some theoretical discussion about predictions. These trends have a real impact on every single one of us.
Oh, absolutely. So, as we kind of head into the future, what's that one big takeaway you're hoping our listeners will remember?
That's a good question. I think for me, it's all about agency. The future of work isn't something that just happens to us. We actually shape it through the choices we make, what we do, and even our mindsets.
I love that. It's so empowering to remember that we're not just watching this evolution of work happen. We can actually make a difference.
Exactly. And we can do that by staying informed, by being adaptable and proactive. It's about spotting those more so trends in your own field and getting ready for them.
So whether it's learning new skills or pushing for better working conditions, or even just staying curious and involved, there are things we can all do to deal with this changing world of work.
You got it. And don't forget, the future of work isn't one size fits all. What's good for one person or industry might not be good for another. It's about figuring out what works for you and the kind of work you do.
That makes sense. So to all of our listeners, as we wrap up this deep dive into Wharton Professor's Forecast 2025,
Yeah.
I want to leave you with something to think about.
Okay.
Don't just watch these trends happen. Get involved. Think about how they might affect your career, your industry, and your life. And most importantly, do something.
That's great advice. The future has so many possibilities. So let's embrace what we don't know, stay curious, and keep learning.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Contact Pod for more deep dives into the world of work and everything else that's interesting. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and don't be afraid to push the limit.